Hello, and in this video, you're going to create this awesome component with 3 different animated cards. The first one is going to have this border animation with a gradient that always changes. The next one is going to be this one, which you've already seen, which leans back with a 3D CSS animation and has this text that wobbles back and forth. And the final one is going to once again have a border animation with these 2 lines constantly chasing each other. And so, without further ado, let's begin the video. Alright, let's begin in a project. In this case, my project is made with Vite. However, if you would like to use Next.js, that's perfectly fine. The difference between the two is honestly negligent. And so, let's go into the source folder, go into components, and create a new file called border cards.jsx. If you'd like, you can use tsx, but honestly it's not necessary. And let's run refc. As always, if this command didn't work for you, let's go to extensions and write ES7 in the search bar. In my case, I have this extension, but this extension might also work. Although I do recommend this one as it's the most popular, and all the commands will be the same as for me. Let's close this and continue. Let's remove this text, add a class name, which will be w-full min-h-screen flex items-center and justify-center to position all the items in the center, bg-center, bg-cover. This is for the background image, which we'll add in a moment, and also flex-call, and on medium devices and higher, flex-row. And let's say gap-10 for now. We might change this value later on. Next, let's import some images. For Next.js users, this won't be necessary. Let's remove this and import the images. Next, let's go still into this div and use classic CSS to style this div. You can use this with Tailwind, but I prefer classic CSS for this. We can say style, background, image, and say URL, orange, city 1, or other 2. Now, if you're using Next.js, instead of all of this, you can simply use the URL of the image. It's simpler, but I've created most of my components in this Vite app, which I'll show you later, which is why I'm using Vite for this project. And so let's go back into this div and create our first card. Let's create a div, give it a class name, and animated underscore card, cursor dash pointer, and group. Inside of here, we'll create a self-closing div. We'll have a few of those. This will be class name, h-500 pixels, w-350 pixels, bg-orange-500. In this case, it won't really matter, but I'll show you a case where the color actually matters. Next, group-hover. So if any of the elements inside this div or this div itself is being hovered on, this will have a certain animation. So we can say h-508 pixels and on group-hover w-358 pixels. And under here, let's add another card, which will be div, class name, same size as for this one, rounded-16 pixels, a class we can also add to the top card, z-10, in here we can have a z of 1, flex items-center, justify-center, and add the content of the card. The content can be whatever you like. In this case, I'll simply add an h2, which will say about me, and have a class name of text-20 pixels, font-bold, text-cyan-200. This card can also have a class name of animated dash card dash before. And I believe that's it for now. Before we continue, let's actually run this app in localhost. For this, let's go to app.jsx and border cards. So let's do border cards over here. And let's go to view and terminal and run npm run dev. Control click onto this link, remove these tabs, and over here we have a website with the majority of the cards and components we've created over the months on this channel. Most of each you can find on the channel or in the description down below. And so here we have our component over here with 2 cards. Let's give this card a background image so we can see it better. For this, we can copy these 2 styles to make the background in the center and cover the entire card once. Let's also copy this. Let's not cut it, but copy it. Add it over here. Now let's change this to 3. And this is actually all going to be 1 card. And this is actually the border. So basically what's going to happen? We're going to have this card with the size of 500 by 350 pixels. And we're going to have this card under it. When we hover over any of them, as you can see, as it's a group, this card expands, acting as the border for this card, as it's actually physically impossible to modify the border in some intricate ways using CSS or Tailwind CSS. For this, we have to go to some interesting measures. But before we can do anything, we'll need to actually create these custom classes for everything to look nice and work properly. For this, let's go into index.css, go to the top. As you can see, we already have quite a lot of classes over here. And let's add the first style, which will be animated underscore card, which will have a display of grid, place dash items of center, a position of relative, not inherit, a height of 500 pixels, and a width of 500 pixels. Let's go back here, and this shouldn't change much realistically, except for the fact that this is now under the page. But don't worry, this will not stay for long. Next, we can say dot animated dash card dash before. In here we can say position instead of relative absolute, transition 0.3 seconds, and animation animate. Animate is going to be a custom animation, 5 seconds, linear, infinite. If we go back, this should happen. As you can see, it's already kind of working. When we hover over it, we get this border. But for now, it's simply of 1 color. Let's fix this now. It's actually surprisingly simple. All we have to do is say add keyframes, animate. So basically we're creating this animation style, 50%, filter, hue-rotate, and let's say 350 degrees. And as you can see, the first card is fully done. The hue is very much rotating and changing to all the colors on the spectrum. Now, as I was saying about this being orange, for now it doesn't matter, as the hue is rotating 350 degrees, meaning almost completely. However, if we change it to 50 degrees, it will essentially only change 2 shades of orange, and in this case, yellow and greenish. The next card we're going to create is going to be the third card, which is going to be most similar to this one. And as a matter of fact, let's actually copy this card, as there's going to be quite a lot of similarities. We can actually leave this group class name, add a rounded dash 16 pixels over here, keep this entire thing the same except for the text. We can change this to my projects. We can imagine this is some portfolio page, although it can be whatever you like. Let's also remove a lot of these styles, everything except the animated card before. We're going to have a width of 50%, a height of 180%, rounded 12 pixels, a Z of 1, a rotate of 45, and a BG of white. Let's see what we have now. Let's reload this. And this is what we have. This massive rectangle, which will actually create a pretty cool animation for the border. First of all, to be able to localize this massive rectangle, let's add overflow-hidden to the wrapper div. So overflow-hidden. And even though this did localize it quite a bit, it's still not complete. To fix this, let's go back to our Visual Studio Code, go to index.css, and change this width from 500 to 350 pixels. This was an error I made earlier, and now everything should work exactly as we want. This rectangle is hidden under the card. For example, if we go back here and comment out the card, this shape will be over here exactly in the way that we need. And let's comment this back in. Next, what we can do is add an animation to that rectangle. And this time we're going to do it quite differently. Instead of doing it in index.css, we're going to add it straight into the Tailwind config, which is something not many people teach. And so let's scroll down, go to tailwind.config.js. Once we're here, let's go to extend and create keyframes. The entire process will be quite similar as adding animations in index.css, but slightly different. First of all, we can say rotate 360 to give this animation a name. Say 0%, meaning the position at the start of the animation. And this is going to be transform, rotate, 0 degrees. So that's the starting position. Let's duplicate this, and the end position is going to be 100% and a rotation of 360 degrees. But this still isn't it. Under keyframes, we need to say animate, or rather animation, and say rotate 360. And this is going to be a string of rotate 360, 2 seconds, 2 seconds, although you can put it whatever you like over here. This determines the speed of the animation. The more seconds, the slower. Linear, infinite. This works exactly like an index.css. So basically we create this keyframes animation, which is this, and then we add it to the style, which is this. And so back in border cards, we can go into this rectangle and say group-hover, animate, -rotate 360, and that's it. Also, over here, what we need to add is a change of size on hover. So we can say hover h-508 pixels, and on hover, remember we don't need to say group-hover because this is the leader of the group. For this, we simply say hover w-357 pixels. Now, if we go back, we get this animation. And if we remove this card for you to be able to see what's underneath, we simply have this rotating around the card. And it seems like there's 2 lines following the outline of this card, which is awesome. Also, let's change this image to Orange Shitty 4. And we're done with these 2 cards. The cards that have border animations. This one with a rotating gradient, and this one with the rotating lines. The only card left is the card in the middle, which is going to have a 3D animation, which we're going to make with CSS. Let's continue. Let's go back here, go to border cards, and right in the middle, create a new div, and give it a class name of card. This is going to be, once again, a custom class. And let's actually make this class name dynamic, as I'm going to show you another method of adding animations to a card like this. And here we can say h-500 pixels, w-500 pixels, rounded-16 pixels, border-white, hover, border-black, border-opacity, -60. And onto the dynamic part, we can say is hovering, in that case, tilted, and otherwise no class at all. Let's actually add this use state. So over here we can say use state snippet. This snippet comes from the ESN extension we added earlier. Let's say is hovering, set is hovering, use state, let's import that from React, and by default it's going to be false. Now let's actually add the change of this state. First of all, on click, this is going to be for the mobile version. As a mobile, you can't tell if a person is hovering over something. And for this, you need some click. So we can say is, actually set is hovering to not is hovering. Under here, we can say on mouse enter. This is actually for the computer. Set is hovering to true. And let's duplicate this on mouse leave. Set is hovering to false. The only thing we need to do now is add the styles in index.css. But I do believe we should save the best for last, and for this reason, let's first of all create the content for the card and move on to the two remaining animations. For this, let's create a new div inside of here, which can have a class name of w-full, h-full, rounded-16 pixels, flex items-center, justify-center, flex-call, gap-10, text-center. And in here, we can have an h1, or maybe, h1, which can say welcome. Once again, it can say whatever you like. A class name of text-cyan-200. Next, font-bold, text-6XL, and Z of 20. This is going to be the main title. Next, under here, we can have a p tag with some random Latin text, which you can find on the internet. And then can have a class name of text-gray-200 and text-16 pixels, like this. Let's see how this looks. And as you can see, we have this kind of card. And for now, simply the border is changing. Now that the content is actually fully done, we can move on to the animation for the card itself and for this text. First of all, let's make the animation for the card. Let's go to index.css, go under this animate keyframes, and say .card, transition, transform, let's spell this correctly, and 1 second, and transform-style, preserve 3D. As I told you, this is going to be a 3D animation, and dot tilted, and this is going to be transform, rotate 3D, select the 3 axes, and this is going to be 1, 0, and 0. So only one of the axes is going to be rotated, and the angle of rotation is going to be 40 degrees. And if we go back, actually let's add cursor dash pointer as well, as this is this type of card. So cursor dash pointer. Let's spell this correctly as well. Tilted instead of tilter. Tilted. And I believe this should now work. And as you can see, it does tilt backward, exactly as we needed. Now the final animation is going to be an animation for this text. And so, let's go back. Let's go to the Tailwind config. This is going to be another one of those types of animations. And say text rotation. Rotation. Let's spell this once again correctly. And this is going to be a slightly longer animation than this one. However, we can copy this to give us a little bit of a head start. Initially, it will be the same, 0 degrees. Next, it's going to be 20%. And that rotation is going to be 25 degrees. Next one is going to be 50%. And that rotation is going to be, once again, 0 degrees. Next, once again, let's duplicate this. And the rotation is going to be 80 and minus 25 degrees. And the final one, the number 100, is going to be back to 0 degrees. And to add this animation to our text, we'll do the same thing as in the third card. We can say group-hover, and let's actually make this a group. I forgot to do that. So group-hover is going to be animate dash, let's see how this is called exactly, copy it, and text rotation. And if I didn't make any mistakes, this should work perfectly. And here it is. Although the text isn't actually rotating it. So let's see what the issue is. And yes, I forgot to add this animation over here. So once again, let's copy this, paste it over here and over here. We might change the speed later on. And as you can see, we have this cool animation on the text. Not particularly practical, but looks quite funny and great. And so we have completely finished this project. We have this first card with a rotating gradient. We have this card, of course, which leans back and moves around this text. And this final card, where these lines constantly crawling around the edges of the card. And so, thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. Thank you.